Good evening, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on what part of the world you're joining us from. Thank you all for joining me. I will be your moderator this evening. My name is Natisha Smith, and I am happy and excited to be hosting the second part of our conversation focused on women in STEM, with today's session focusing on the importance of mentorship and community. Joining me are an amazing group of women who are here to share their STEM expertise coming from backgrounds in pharmacy, data science, analytics, the medical field. We have Emily Hawes, Jen Adams, Kim Fessel, Michelle Snyder, and Rita Biologili. Rita, I am so sorry. I really tried to nail that, and that did not come out the way I wanted it to. Thank you all for joining me this evening. I am very excited to have each and every one of you here with us, especially for a conversation as important as this. There's been so much focus on improving representation in STEM, the value of getting women excited about STEM early. But one key component of that is just women having a support system and women having other women to help them. And so I know that our audience is really excited to have your expertise and advice today. To get us started, I want to sort of acknowledge that women in STEM is a growing field, but likely as you were coming through your field, there was even less representation and examples of women doing the work that you do available. So what got you interested in STEM? Who were your role models when you started thinking about STEM as a career? Emily, I want to start with you.
Yeah, so being a physician, my biggest role model was my pediatrician when I was little. She was a really great pediatrician. She was warm and friendly, and I thought, man, when I was 5, I said, I want to be her when I grow up. I don't know that I have ever told her that, but she was an inspiration to me and made me feel comfortable. And I said, that's what I want to do. So that was my inspiration to go into STEM at a very young age.
Thank you, Emily. Jen, you are in an interesting field that I don't know. I mean, I don't want to knock pharmacy, but I've never woken up and been like, you know what I really want to do? Be a pharmacist. So what got you into your field?
So I always knew that I wanted to do something in healthcare. I've always been a helper and a fixer, right? I want to fix what's wrong. And so I knew I was interested in healthcare, and I just was trying to figure out like, okay, well, what do I want to do? What does that look like? And I started rolling things out, right? Like, I don't like feet, so I didn't want to be a podiatrist. No offense to the dentists out there, but I was like, I can't put my hands in somebody's mouth all day long, right? So I started rolling things out, maybe not always based on the best information, but had a friend who was interested in pharmacy. And so she was a very early peer mentor for me. And she was like, well, why don't you check out pharmacy? You might want to be a pharmacist. And funny enough, I had a conversation with a currently practicing pharmacist who was leaving pharmacy, tried to talk me out of it. And all of the things that he was telling me about why he didn't want to be a pharmacist were all things that appealed to me. So it kind of backfired a little bit. But had that friend not said, hey, have you thought about this? You know, because I was really looking at a lot of other different things. It's funny because I did go on to become a pharmacist, and she still works in the pharmacy field, but has a very different technology related job, does a lot of health IT. So her path changed a little bit, but having that peer guidance of like, hey, have you thought about this was really important for me.
Jen, I love that someone tried to dissuade you and you were like, actually, this makes me even more excited about the thing that I want to do. Michelle, Rita, and Kim, all of you have roles that are in the data world, though I think how data shows up in your work has been a little bit different. So Michelle, I want to start with you. What got you enthused about data and sort of led you to the career that you're in?
So I'm actually a mathematician at the core. So I did my undergraduate and my PhD in very pure mathematics. And then I actually worked as a research mathematician for 10 years. So I'm actually fairly new to working in this space. But the thing that actually got me into the job that I'm in now is that when I when I was working as a mathematician, I started getting really involved in the Association for Women in Mathematics, which is an international organization that supports women in mathematical fields. And I started volunteering specifically for a program where we would take groups of students to Capitol Hill and have them talk to their legislators, talk to senators and representatives about supporting legislation to fund women's STEM programs, all the way K through 12 up through research and industry mathematicians. And the woman who was running those programs at the time, I got to be a good friend of hers and keep in touch with her. And then about a year ago, she offered me a job at her startup. And so I am actually exactly in my current role because of networking and having a community. So I didn't seek to become a data analyst. I just happened to end up there, but I work with mathematicians, and so I feel right at home.
I love that. Rita, what was your journey? Was it something that you found, or did it find you?
A little bit of both, I think. So my parents, when I was growing up, both of them have had careers in research and analysis. And so that really sort of drove me in this direction of curiosity and like finding things out and how do I analyze the world around me and what does it all mean? And so I think throughout sort of my education and career, I've really focused on what research and data look like in different contexts. And that led me through like doing research in humanities and then very much into this sort of interdisciplinary world. And then I kept kind of asking like, okay, well, how do I answer this question? How do I answer this question? And ended up very much in the realm of like statistics and coding. And that's sort of how I ended up here. So it's really just this base notion of like, how do I figure things out and learning the tools from there. So I think that's sort of how I've ended up here.
I love you highlighting a spirit of curiosity being something that sort of led you through your journey. And last but definitely not least, Kim.
Yeah, my journey is also a bit circuitous and kind of amorphous, let's say. I think a lot of people in data science kind of experience that. I mean, it wasn't a field when we were first going through college and those kind of things. So I originally was in more of like chemistry and those sorts of things back in college, as well as mathematics. I went on to do a PhD in math, and kind of through my experiences, I was always involved in, kind of math plus science, like how do I answer questions about science? And one way that you can do that is through data. And so eventually my projects led me to data and learning how to code and answer some of those questions in more of a data sort of way, which then leads pretty naturally to a career in data science.
Thank you all for sharing. So one of the things that we sort of started talking about was the early voices that shaped your career. And I think that's so important because we talk about mentorship, which is this very formal thing that I think it takes a while in your professional career to really understand what that means. But even before then, there are voices that are starting to sort of help shape the decisions that you make and probably even shape what a good mentor looks like to you. So I want to ask this group, what was some of the early advice that you received as you were starting out exploring your mathematics careers, your STEM careers, your pharmacy careers? And how did you start to navigate what was good advice and what was maybe not that awesome advice? Michelle, I want to pivot to you because it's really interesting to me that you found this like organization and group that was focused on supporting women in mathematics. Like, how did you find a program like that?
So I went to Smith College as an undergrad, which is an all-women's college still. And so I had from my pretty early days known that having a strong community was very important to me. And, there are just so few women in mathematics that I didn't want to have to fight to be heard from the age of 18. So at least I had that 4 years to build up that network. And so coming out of Smith, I went to a graduate program, which had, 25 men and me and one other woman. And so I immediately started to seek out a community. And I had been aware of the AWM when I was in college, but I didn't really need it then. So when I needed it, it was there. And there are organizations like that for everything. There's a Women in Data Science program, which is awesome as well.
Michelle, how did it feel going from a mostly women's space to a space that seemed, I want to say mixed, but actually seemed very highly male? How did you navigate that sort of shift in what your peer group looked like?
It was a little bit rough. There's sort of a double-edged sword that happens where the program that I was in had been seeking to increase the number of women in their program. And one of the ways they did that was they gave us more grants than they gave the men. And so that was convenient because I didn't have to teach quite as much. I had a little bit cushier of a grad school experience, but it did mean that there was blowback from the men who just referred to it derogatively as, oh, you have girl money. You don't have to teach because you have girl money. And so it created a lot of tension. And, it was coming from a good place, but there's these other aspects that go along with it. So I think the biggest thing for me was having that community, having people to reach out to, having women in other graduate programs that I could talk to and say, hey, are you dealing with this as well? How are we going to get through this together? And building up, just having that structure just to tell me that I'm not the crazy one was really all I needed.
Emily, I saw you nodding very emphatically. And I also know that you were in a program that, like, being one of few women was something that very much shaped your early stages. So how did you navigate the voices around you, but also how did you navigate a space where maybe representation wasn't as easy for you to find or see?
Yeah, so part of my story involves when I went to undergrad, there was a lot of male-heavy sort of recruitment into the medical field. They had more research opportunities. It was more recognized that they would want to be physicians. And those of us who were females seeking to be physicians didn't get that same sort of mentorship and grooming component to it. And so whereas my male colleagues were set up with these research projects and publications, I was told, yeah, just go take the MCAT, do that. And that's how you get into medical school. And I figured that out on my own. And so another piece of the story is that I didn't actually get into med school on my very first try, which I imagine a lot of our listeners may identify with that sentiment, not getting in on the first try, and then thinking, oh gosh, is this because I'm not good enough at this? Am I not meant to be a doctor? And that actually, to your question, is the moment where I realized that mentorship component, because I had a couple of people in my life say, yep, that's probably not for you then. You didn't get in. Gosh, is there something else you could do? But then there were also voices saying, did they give you a good reason? Is there a good reason that you can't be a doctor? And that for me was sort of the guiding principle until I heard a good reason that I couldn't be a doctor, other than that I, like, oh, you haven't fulfilled these requirements. Go get more clinical things. Go do this, go do that. I did those things and they let me be a doctor because there wasn't a good reason. I just needed to keep trying and getting that mentorship and sort of those opportunities that weren't afforded me earlier in my career.
Jen, I've also been watching you empathize with some of the things Michelle and Emily are saying. And I know that you are someone who has really cultivated an ability of, like, hearing something going, I don't know if that actually applies to me. How did you start to grow that muscle earlier in your career when you maybe had less experiences to back up the confidence that you have in your work right now?
Yeah, so I've had kind of an interesting career path as a pharmacist, because I've worked in national pharmacy associations. I now have a doctorate in education, and I'm working in a college of pharmacy, and I'm a faculty member, and I teach, and I do all these other things, and things that most people don't always consider. Like, I do a lot of health policy work, which is a little different than what most people think of like a practicing pharmacist who's in a community pharmacy dispensing. So early in my career working in national associations, I definitely had some folks that were some of the first women leaders in that space that would give me advice based on their experience as the first handful of women that were in that space, and how they had to navigate it. And it didn't fit for me. It didn't fit for my lived experience. It didn't fit for what I was experiencing at the time. And maybe some of it was me being a little bit naive, but there were definitely some folks that gave me advice about that I kind of had to be more like a man to navigate that space and needed to act in a certain way. And I just wasn't, it just didn't sit right. And so I took some of the pieces out of their advice that I thought, that part of it works for me, but this part doesn't. I wear dresses. I don't wear suits ever. And I worked in this very Washington, D.C., formal space and showed up in my dress. And I know that sounds kind of like a silly example, but it allowed me to still be me and take the pieces of advice that worked and the pieces of advice that I felt like didn't work and still move forward and allow me to build up the confidence to truly be myself without trying to be somebody that I wasn't.
Thank you, Jen. We have an audience question I want to ask, and then I will sort of pivot to a broader question. So the question is, and I think, Emily, this is to you, how were you made aware that you had areas of your application that fell short? Like, did the individual med schools knock on your door and say, Emily, here's what you're missing? Or was there another way that you got that feedback and awareness of where you needed to round your skill set out?
Man, that would have been nice. No, what happened was the schools that I had applied to and didn't get into, I emailed them and some of them just said, you didn't get in, end of story. But some of them I actually pursued and was able to meet with the dean or an admissions counselor or somebody there and say, hey, what parts of my application didn't look good to you? As well as seeking advice from some physicians that I had known, like my community physicians. I said, what did you do to get into medical school? And let me tell you, that is no longer accurate data. That turnover of what you need to get into medical school has really changed. So that's maybe not your best source. But the admissions people were really, I pursued that down. So don't be afraid to be bold and email. The worst anybody is going to tell you is, sorry, we're not going to tell you. There just took a lot of persistence to cold email people and say, what is it I need to be doing better?
And I love this part of this discussion because I think it also highlights that the journey is not always linear, right? Like you can stumble and fall. And that doesn't mean that you're an imposter or that you're not good enough. It just means that you need to seek feedback from places that you trust or better understand your field. Kim, I wanted to ask you, because I know that one, you work in a career right now where you're helping other students round out and cultivate their skill sets, but also I'm sure that you had your own moments where maybe something didn't go as planned. How did you navigate your first moment of, should I be doing this? And what's the advice that you give people now when they're having those moments?
Yeah, definitely. So a little bit of background, I'm in data science, but at a boot camp, some director of a data science boot camp. So we have a lot of students that come in that have kind of, that question in the back of their mind, is this for me? Can I do it? Can I make it through? And then can I get a job in this field? It's a really tough field sometimes to get into. And so for my own personal background, I kind of went through growing up, I was from a really small town. There weren't a whole lot of people pursuing the types of careers I wanted to pursue. And so I felt like, I have a really good handle on all of these different concepts I'm learning. It seemed like I was doing a good job. Then I went to college and it was the first exposure of, now I have some competition, some other folks that are wanting to do the same thing as me. And there are some areas that I'm going to have to put in more work than they did because that's just not how my education was so far. So I do remember kind of some of the first few classes as a freshman, maybe not doing as well as I thought I would do in certain areas. But I do think kind of having those experiences and then getting past them, somehow finding a way to say, I'm going to do this, no matter what, I'm going to do it. The more you can do that, the more you'll have those experiences to look back on when those kind of things happen in the future. And I think that's absolutely been the case for me. As I've progressed through my career, there's more experiences now I can look back on and say, oh, remember when you didn't think you could do that and you still did it? Do it again now, right? So you can keep drawing on those the further along you get in your career. Absolutely.
Thank you, Cam. I also want to circle back on something that Jen touched on, which is maybe the way I would say is as we continue to sort of develop the sense of where all the things women can accomplish and all the different hats women can wear. I think maybe what success looks like to women today might look and feel different than it did in the past. And that might inform the kinds of advice that people, whether it's a woman mentor or male mentor, give you, and whether or not that meets your needs. So before we start getting into like mentors who changed our lives, I think we should acknowledge that they're like, sometimes you just get not awesome advice. And I think one of the things in building your confidence, and it sounds like this is true for all of you, is sort of figuring out when is the advice not that good and when should you not take it because it doesn't actually match what you care about as a woman in your field. And so I want to sort of ask the question, like, what's advice that like you got that you look back on and you were like, that was not great advice. That does not match what it means to me to be a woman in this field. I want to start with you, Rita.
Good question. So I think the thing that immediately comes to mind is I had a mentor in grad school who was not my advisor, was not even remotely in my field, but he really, we had a good relationship. We worked together on a lot of different projects. And in general, I thought, he advised me very well. But there was this one moment where I was sort of veering more towards this data science thing. And he was like, are you sure you can do that? And, I was sort of like, I think I can, and then kind of kept pressing forward. But there was definitely this moment of doubt where I was like, I don't know about like, I don't know if I should listen to you or not listen to you. So I think that was a difficult point for me. I think I've also, had moments where I've had managers who were like clearly not thinking about my best interest. And it's difficult to notice that, especially when you're already doubting yourself, and to say sort of like, okay, this is not how this should be, and to extricate yourself from that situation.
Thank you, Rita. I want to pivot to an audience question. And Michelle, I'm going to actually pass this to you first. One of our audience members wants to know that they're currently working on an all women's practice right now. Do you think this information would hurt or help them as they reach out to other male and female physicians? It's something you would share. So I think the question really at its core is, if you've currently made the choice to work in a community-based setting, a setting where your coworkers, your manager, these are people who look like you, who are women like you. How do you navigate sharing that? And have you found, Michelle, that like sharing that you went to an all-women college, like has that hurt you? Has that helped you? How have you navigated sort of including that in the way that you talk about your career when you're talking to others?
So I'm not sure how much my experience will translate to this, but Smith College, it has a very strong tradition of having a lot of pride in being a women's college. And so, I mean, just as an example, they make a t-shirt that says it's not a girls' school without men, it's a women's college without boys, right? So we kind of have that attitude going in. So I tend to brag about it. And then if it makes people uncomfortable, then I know that I don't really care if they're uncomfortable. So I'm not sure that that's exactly helpful. I think if sharing that information hurts you, or in the eyes of someone, that maybe that someone is not the type of person that's going to give you the advice that you want, right? If you made that choice to work there, that meant that was important to you. And you may be getting advice sort of like what Rita got, where it's not in line with the direction that you want to go.
I think, Michelle, I think that's actually a really good point, is if this matters to you and somebody looks down on that, like the question is that a kind of person you want to work with? I want to open this up to the rest of you. As you look at your career, were there times that you strayed away from women-focused spaces, from women-focused research, from women-focused work because you were worried about being stereotyped or limiting your network or the way you'd be perceived? Or did you make it a point to really lean into those spaces? Jen, I'm going to pivot this one to you first.
So I've actually found that when I collaborate with other women, it's a much more congenial experience for me. And I've not shied it away at all of seeking out other female partners and collaborators on research projects and things like that. those are some of the experiences that I've had in my career that have probably been the most valuable for me and that have actually moved my career forward, because I have collaborators where we build each other up. We're not trying to compete. We're not trying to tear each other down. We want to be certain that everyone succeeds. I'll give an example. I'm part of a group that worked on a big grant. And this big grant, I couldn't actually be officially on the grant. My husband was a part of the group that gave out the grant. So I couldn't officially work on it, but they felt like I had good expertise and they wanted me to be able to benefit from working on this grant. And so we made a very concerted effort that we were going to have a certain number of publications that would come out of this work. And each one of us was going to serve as a primary author on each one of these publications so that we all had the same benefit. So for faculty, like, we need to be primary authors on original research and all of that. And so even though this is something where it could have been one person who took credit for all of it, it was very congenial. And it was something where we all benefited in a very realistic way, even though not all of us were the principal investigator on this $1 million grant. And so I think that's a perfect example of how a group of women came together. We got stuff done. We made a difference in our community with this. It was a COVID grant. We stood up testing in community pharmacies all across the state. We tested thousands and thousands of people. We made sure pharmacists were getting paid for their services. Like, it was amazing, the work that we were doing. And we made a difference. We all benefited in the same way. And it was just such a positive experience for all of us. So I'm going to continue to seek out female collaborators because it's been such a positive experience for me.
Michelle, is there anything you wanted to respond to that with?
Yeah. So one of the probably the best thing I did at my last job, which was as a research mathematician, it was about 10% women. And I worked with two other women and we organized a very large 2-week-long workshop that was specifically for women in mathematics. And as I was organizing this, I was kind of keeping it on the down low because I was a little worried about some of my male colleagues pushing back on it. And some of them made some snarky comments. But after we did it, the way that people talked about it, a lot of the same things that Jen was saying, where we were very productive, we were very collaborative, everyone was getting credit, everyone was welcomed in. Specifically, there wasn't a bar. Well, if you haven't had these 7 classes, we're not talking to you. And what I found most amazing is that afterwards, I gave a lot of talks about how much work we had gotten done and how great the environment was. And many men came up to me afterwards and said, how can we incorporate this environment into more of our conferences, right? And why did it have to be all women? And I said, well, if the environment was already like this, we wouldn't have had to have it be all women. But there's nothing about the culture that says we can't spread this and bring more people in, right? I think that there are many people who would like things to be more collaborative, but they don't know how to start. And so I think that having these women-only events and women-only spaces can serve as a role model to show this is how you do it. What if we do a paradigm shift and we don't have to be trying to cut each other down all the time? So I hope that other people saw what Jen did and took that as inspiration as well.
For spaces that women are in where they love this thought of community, but maybe they don't see it, they don't see as many women to build community with. How do you navigate that? So Kim, I want to pivot to you because I know that data science can be a very male-dominated space. What has it been like for you to sort of find women to be part of your community and part of your collaborators?
Yeah, I would definitely say in some ways it's a very male-dominated space. In other ways, the women that are in the space are very receptive to building community. Every single person I've ever talked to, women in the space, always excited to talk more about what they do, hear about what I do, think about ways to help each other, those kind of things. So it is interesting, even if there are fewer women, it still almost feels like a larger group than what there is, just because everyone's very welcoming and friendly. So I think that's kind of the first step, is just to reach out to the people that there are there. And then, of course, trying to, with things like our boot camp, trying to bring more women into the space is another thing that we're trying to do. Absolutely.
Jen.
Yeah, so I'll just add a little bit to that. That I think back to like Mr. Rogers when he says, look for the helpers, right? I say when you're in a space and you don't feel comfortable and you can't find your people, can't find your tribe, look for the includers, male or female, look for the includers and the people that want to be sure that everyone can participate. Often I find the includers in the women, but I've also found a handful of male colleagues that respect the women and respect what we bring to the table, and they want us to be included as well. And so my spin on Mr. Rogers is look for the includers.
Speaking of looking for your tribe, I want to talk a little bit about how to find a mentor once you recognize that you need one, right? I think we talked very generally at the start, like at some point you realize that you need somebody to give you real advice. But then it's like, what happens when you recognize that? Like, how do you find someone who looks at you and says, you have value, I want to see you succeed, and I want to give you advice because I believe in you? And how do you make sure that that mentor's approach to mentorship matches what you need from them? So Emily, I want to ask you, what was your sort of first foray into formally getting a mentor, and how did you navigate that process?
Yeah, so I am in a very sort of niche field. I'm in pediatric rheumatology, which if you've never heard of, you're in really good company. But I realized that was something I wanted to do. And I immediately reached out to a pediatric rheumatologist who was practicing nearby. And I said, I think this is something I'm interested in. Can I shadow you? Can I work with you? Can I learn from you? And just from there, sort of, she was very receptive and took me on as her precepting student in medical school, which was a lovely experience. And then she sort of helped guide me into the field of pediatrics, which is the first step, and then to the fellowship of pediatric rheumatology. But along the way, realized that she couldn't be my one and only mentor. So she sort of got me started into the field and said, here are some things that you need to do. But when I developed a niche within a niche interest in global health pediatric rheumatology, which is a thing that really nobody does, then I just started cold emailing people. Which is a bold and zesty strategy, but does pay off. You just have to be okay with a lot of people saying, I'm not the one that you want to talk to, but here, try this person. They might know somebody, and really connecting until I found somebody who said, yes, that is my job. I would love to help you. Let's get you started. And just really seeking out all of the opportunities that are there for mentorship, and really being clear upfront that that's what you want, not just, hey, can I talk about your life? You seem really cool, but I want to talk about your life. You seem really cool. I would also like to do what you're doing, and including that piece of, hey, can you help me get to where you are or somewhere similar, so that that intent is there right from the beginning. They know that you're in the market for a mentor.
Rita, how did you navigate getting your first mentorship relationship started, and like making sure that it was useful and meaningful to you?
Yeah, so I think, I don't know if this was necessarily my first mentorship experience, but it was pretty early. I was doing some work that wasn't as technical as what I wanted to be doing. It wasn't exactly where I wanted to be. And I sort of tangentially knew this woman I was working with, who was in a slightly different field. And I was like, first of all, what she's doing is really interesting. And second of all, she just seems super cool. And as one of these people who's kind of like an includer, right? And so I sent her an email and I was like, can we get coffee? And was able from there to sort of say to her, like, here are all the things you're doing. Here are the things that I'm doing and want to do. and I would love to like talk about this more with you. If you have any work, like I'd love to learn from you. And so that ended up being a really fruitful relationship, just because I sort of like went out of my way trying to talk to this person who was like kind of tangential. We ended up being good friends and good collaborators, and I learned a lot from her.
So we have an audience question that I want to ask, because right now we have been talking about the space that I love, which is women supporting other women, women who you reach out to them, you email them, and they're like, yeah, let me help you, let me open this door. We are getting asked to sort of consider when that's not the case. So how do you navigate an environment that is competitive and has catty behavior, especially and particularly in all female environment or mostly female environment? I don't want to assume anyone's environment, so I feel like I'm not going to point this toward anyone, but is there anyone who feels comfortable speaking to their experiences navigating an environment that maybe was not initially as open or welcoming?
Yeah, well, let me tell you about how med school is competitive. We out the gate, people, the term for it is gunners, which is probably not a politically correct term anymore. That has to go away. But they are the people who are out front leading the charge on top of everything, and they are competitive and they want you to know it. And those sorts of people in that sort of environment, the goal then for me was to say, great, you're doing you. That's fine. I'm going to do me over here. And instead found the people who were less on the catty scale. And then had to sort of reckon with that of like, okay, these are all very accomplished women. Everybody's working really hard. We could be very competitive about this. But the mantra we sort of adopted as friends is that, we're like a string of Christmas lights. Just because somebody shines brightly doesn't mean you're any less bright. And Christmas lights are best when you all shine brightly. And so that was, we took that competitive group and said, thanks, but no thanks. We're going to just all shine bright over here. And if we all work a little harder because you're shining bright and I want to do that too, great. But doesn't mean we have to get all up in each other's space.
Jen.
Well, I definitely had a friend in pharmacy school that was also super competitive. And had to do better than me on an exam. So I stopped telling her how I did. And I would say, well, wait, how did you do? And then she would tell me, and I would purposely, whatever my score was, it was less than at least a little bit. I'm not a competitive person. And so for me, I don't need to compete. And so at least on my end, I could do that to smooth things over. I have been in some environments where there were some women who weren't necessarily all supportive. The way I approached it was to do my best to influence them to think about, hey, we're all here in a pretty male-dominated space. And we've got a lot of old white guys, dominating what we're doing. And if we stick together, we are so much more powerful than if we're arguing and fighting with each other. We can do so much more as a team. And so that, at least for me, whether it was, I'm just going to not compete, or whether it was, I want to influence you to bring us all together so that we can do more together. That's kind of how I've approached it.
I want to ask maybe the step down from like active catty, quote unquote, behavior, which might just be like, the higher up you go, the few seats there seem to be, right? I think there might be spaces, and Jen, Emily, you would have spaces like this where potentially there actually are a decent number of women when you're looking at certain roles and certain levels, but you start to look at leadership, that it gets, there's just less, right? And so that can maybe naturally create competition, even when that is not your desire. But because there just seems like there are fewer women moving up the chain, at some point it is you or your colleague who is getting that next step. How do you navigate maintaining a spirit of we all shine brightly together when it feels like at a certain level that's harder for it to be true? Michelle, I saw you nodding along, so I'm actually going to pivot this one to you first.
So the way we talk about this in when I've talked to legislators and I try to explain the problem of women in math, if you look at undergraduate, there's a pretty good percentage of women in math, it's 40 to 50. And then you go to the graduate level and it drops to 25. And then you go to the faculty level and it drops to 15. And you go to tenure and it keeps dropping. So we call that the leaky pipeline. And you get, people opt out at different levels for different reasons, right? There's going to be some people that leave that have reasons for nothing to do with the mathematical environment, but there will be a lot of people who leave just because they're just sick of fighting the system, right? And I've been very fortunate to the job that I had for 10 years was a completely flat organization. So there wasn't this promotional scale. So we didn't have that level of competitiveness. I think it's very tricky because you exactly as Jen was saying, like we're all stronger together, and you don't want to get into a position where there's only two women in the room and you're fighting against each other. So I think, I don't know how to do it besides just avoid environments that don't make you feel like you can be yourself there.
I think probably another method, and thank you, Michelle, for sharing, is also just leveraging that mentorship group, that community, to sort of help you fight the system. I love that terminology. So I guess I'm going to ask this group the question of like, what's the best advice or support a mentor has given you in sort of navigating the systems around you that maybe have made it harder for you as a woman to succeed or to move forward or to continue moving up? Kim, I want to sort of pivot this one to you. What's the best advice you've received in navigating the space that you're in?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I think two pieces of advice that I try to keep in my own personal mind. One is, knowing what you want and then asking for it, right? It's not always easy for some of us to just articulate what it is that you are expecting for your career, and trying to, even to tell yourself, this is what I want for my career and this is how I'm going to get there. So being honest about that and letting other people know this is where I'm expecting to go. And the other piece of advice I've gotten before that I think it helps with the imposter syndrome a bit as well, is any new role or any new project that you're taking on, any new step you're taking, you should be a little scared of that next step, right? There should be some element of, oh gosh, can I make it or can I not? Can I do this thing? Otherwise, you're not really growing too much. Like if I've got this, I can do it in my sleep, whatever, maybe it's not, a big enough stretch for you. So those are the two things I try to keep in mind. Keep articulating what it is, what you want. And also it should scare you just a little bit every next little step.
Rita, what has the best advice you've received then?
Yeah, I think sort of just going off of what Kim was saying, that like, you really just feeling like you can't do something and needing to sort of push through that. And similarly, the idea that you just like, I guess that there are a lot of people in the world who are going to push through it and not really worry about whether or not they can do something. And so if you're worrying about whether you can do something or not, that probably means you're pretty prepared to jump into it and be able to do it. And so just that thought process of like, not everybody is sort of there. It is very normal and standard to sit here and think about that, but just the sole act of considering it is really important to accomplishing what you need to accomplish.
Rita, I love that. Somebody once gave me the advice that there is probably somebody doing 30% of the job that you were doing, and they're very content and okay with it, while you were like over analyzing your 100%. And so the need for perfection sometimes can get in the way, especially for women, and when you have imposter syndrome, from you going for things and reaching for things. Jen, my question for you is slightly different, because I think one of the things you said earlier in this conversation was also around resisting the urge to embody forms of leadership or presentation that don't feel aligned with who you are. So a lot of times when we talk about professionalism or what it looks like to be a leader or what it looks like to be A, B, and C, a lot of that's coded, right? It's coded around the gender of somebody, the orientation of that person. how did you not just like sort of develop advice, you leverage advice to navigate your career, but also do that in a way that still felt authentic to who you wanted to be once you became a leader in the space that you're in?
Yeah, so I mean, I still wore professional dresses, but I was gonna wear a dress. And I think there's sort of a piece of that of I think sometimes when we talk about professionalism, like, well, if I have a tattoo, a sleeve, like, does that mean I have to always wear long sleeves no matter what the temperature is outside? Can I, can I truly express myself if I wanted to have a streak of pink hair today? I think that's a challenge. And I think it's a challenge early in your career. And I think sometimes we all make slight concessions in that early on in our career because of the fact that we don't want that to be something that prevents us from achieving our dreams and achieving our goals. And so I think it's a matter of figuring out, am I a little too edgy in a way that's going to prevent me from achieving my goals? And how can I still be truly authentic to myself without doing that? And I also think, at least in the healthcare side of things, that we have patients who are looking for people who look like them and act like them and think like them, and they want someone who identifies with them. And if I never get to become a pharmacist, or I never get to become a physician or a nurse practitioner or whatever it is, that you want to do, then I can't be that person for those people. So if I make slight modifications now that I still feel true to myself, but fit in at least a little in the professional world, that hopefully that can help me get there. But for me, it's evolved over time in figuring out, like, what does that look like and what does that mean? I'm probably a little less worried about it now than I was then, in feeling like I don't want to have to look like a man in this man's world that I'm living and operating in right now. I want to look like myself. I want to feel like myself. I want to act like myself. I also don't want to be the person that doesn't have a family, that my whole life is devoted to my work. I want to have that balance. And so I think that was something too, that in looking for mentors, that I looked for some that had better balance, that they didn't neglect their families and their children to be able to be successful in the working world. And I want to have it all. It might not look exactly like what it looked like for the early female leaders in my career path. And that's okay, because for me, success looks different. And it's all about defining that success too, and defining it for me. And it all started with that, like, how do I feel comfortable in how I'm presenting myself in this space, where when you work for a national association, everyone knows your name, and they're looking at, especially I worked a lot with students, they're looking at you as this role model. And how I presented all of that, it just had to fit. And it also had to be something that helps students see that they can fit, even if they're not exactly the same, even if they're not wearing the dark blue or black suit.
There is something you touched on, Jen, around with two things. One, like the size of concessions that you're willing to make to succeed in the spaces that you want to be in, and then also how maybe the things that you need from your mentor changes over time. I want to hold on to those two things. We have an audience question that is specific, but I'm hoping that between Jen, Emily, Michelle, Kim, and Rita, we can come to an answer. The question is, what are your thoughts on women in orthopedics, specifically orthopedic surgery in particular? Emily, I see you nodding, so I'm just going to pass this to you.
Yeah, so I have several friends who are orthopedic surgeons. Some of them are the chief residents this year at Colorado, their orthopedic surgery program, and then some all over the country. And I think it's amazing. It's becoming a more widely accepted field for women to be in, and there's a lot of female empowerment there. So if that is your dream, being a girl is not going to keep you out of orthopedics, if that is the heart of your question. If that is your dream, go for it. You can be a bone doctor all the day is long. That said, I have no interest in orthopedic surgery, but was in an orthopedic surgery rotation in medical school. And I, was watching the surgeon work, and he said, okay, well, do you have any questions? And I had been watching, and I said, yeah, can you strip a screw in somebody's knee the same way you strip a screw like that you would screw into the house? And he was like, do you want to be an orthopedic surgeon? Because do you know how many people who want to be orthopedic surgeons have never held a screwdriver? And so just my point with that story being that if that is your passion, go for it sort of in all aspects of your life, and don't just hyper focus on, I'm going to get really good at organic chemistry. You got to do the hands-on bit too.
So I am not an orthopedic surgeon, but I'm going to add to this. I dated one for a while, so we'll throw that in there. It's so much, it's like DIY work in your house, right? Like there's saws involved and power tools and all these other things. And if you look on Instagram right now and find girls doing DIY, like literally building rooms in their house, like rebuilding stuff, girls can do anything. So I say, if that's what you want to do, go for it.
I love that the takeaway is if you're interested in HGTV and medicine, like this actually might be the move for you. That is exciting and slightly terrifying all at the same time. Thank you both for answering that question for our audience member. We're sort of getting to our end of our time. So I do want to circle back on that question of navigating what your community and your mentors look like over time, right? It's like who you are and what you need when you started your career, when you first entered your program, probably looks a lot different than what you need right now. Kim, how have your needs as you look at your community and your mentors changed over time? And what matters to you today that maybe didn't matter to you as much when you started?
Yeah, definitely. It really does change a lot, and things that you kind of think you want in the beginning, maybe are different, 10 years down the line. So I would say in kind of the beginning, some of the best mentors for me were people that could kind of advise me what is possible, like what are the different fields. Like I mentioned before, I grew up in a really small town. I didn't have a lot of role models of here's what you can do with math, or here's what you can do with science, or any of those kind of things. So at first, I really just needed people to kind of talk me through what is possible, what would it be like to be on the job at one of these other, one of these STEM fields. And then as I moved into graduate school and those kind of things, again, kind of thinking about future career steps, but now being a little bit more focused and intentional on, if I do this, then I can do that, and then I can do that. So thinking about kind of the progression a little bit more later on. And then at this point, I'm definitely starting to think more about work-life balance. I think the further along you get, the more you start protecting that personal time and trying to make sure that you have a good handle on both. I think that's kind of more of what I would look for in a mentor now, is just how do I, achieve what I want to achieve, but then at nighttime say, okay, that's it, go on to my personal life, and how do I, manage that split.
Rita, how has it changed for you, and has that changed how you've approached fostering those relationships as your needs have changed?
Yeah, so I think at first I was, sort of trying to figure out different things that I might want to do, and then thinking about like, okay, within this field, like what is the structure? Like how does one even get ahead in this field? Like what is this piece and how does this tie to this piece? What are all these roles and how do they fit together? And so looking for that kind of structuring, I think, was really key for me earlier on. Now I'm sort of in a place where I'm thinking about like, okay, the next like 5 years, like what does this look like? And how does that happen? So interestingly, I think mentors for me have moved a little bit from someone who's like much more senior to me to maybe like a few years ahead of me. And that shift in terms of where I'm going. Yeah.
Emily, I know that when you and I have gotten to know each other, you have also sort of talked about a shift in what you want out of your career and then what you need from your mentor. How has that manifested for you? And what does that mean for what a good mentor is to you today versus what that meant to you when you first started.
Yeah, let me tell you, being a doctor mama is no joke. So having a baby really shifts what you need in a mentor, because it's one thing to get complete career advice. You also need somebody who can give you advice on what is it like to have a 4-month-old baby and also be on call. What does that mean for you? How does that work? And I can tell you that having a mentor who is in that space, who is, she's just a year ahead of me in terms of, like, she had a baby a year before me. She's in attending now for a year or two before me, and saying, all right, here's how you navigate the end of fellowship with a big, with a little baby. And here's your next big step. And here's how you make this happen. It was really revolutionary, especially when her advice was get a new nanny. Like the baby and the nanny weren't connecting. And she was like, it is not worth your time. Just get a new nanny and make that work. And you get better at your job, you get better at your life when you get that piece of mentorship that helps bring it all together.
Michelle, a similar question for you, but also sort of thinking about how the communities that you've built around you have changed. And listening to your stories, we sort of heard you go from a really proud, amazing all-women's college to spaces where you are sort of championing these communities of women who are like making the men figure out how to get it together. How have you both developed changing mentorship relationships, but also changing community bonds as you've changed and developed in your career?
So I think in the early stages, I felt more like I was seeking out people that were also suffering or who had had a hard time in graduate school and who had navigated the system, and then looking for advice of, okay, how do I just get through this and how do I figure out how to find my place? But the longer I worked in the research mathematics community, I found that the women who had forged the path, right? The women who had been there for 30 years, most of their advice tended to fall along the lines of, you just have to figure out how to play the game. You just have to accept that a lot of things, that sexism isn't open anymore, right? Everybody knows not to say things that are going to get them in trouble. It's a lot more subtle now. It's meetings you just happen to get not invited to, or conversations that happen in a hall that no one thinks to bring you in on later. And I felt it very discouraging, this sort of acceptance that they had of, this is just what we have to do to survive here. And so since realizing that was sort of where they were coming from, I said, no, it's been several decades, right? We gotta start actually changing this. So I've sought out more people who are defying that sort of attitude, right? I found a woman who had made it fairly high up in leadership, who came to work with purple hair, a purple outfit, and purple shoes. And I said, she is someone who has owned who she is and still managed to survive in this world. So I think the best we can do for ourselves and our sanity, as well as paving the way for the next generation to come in, is to not accept, oh, I'm just going to figure out how to play the game. So I've tried to seek out more women who are just not like, feminism has been going on for too long for us to be settling at this point. It's my soapbox, sorry.
That is not a soapbox. That is amazing. And that brings us to our final 2 minutes of our time together. So one, it's hard to say goodbye to yesterday, as a famous song once said. I absolutely hate having to wrap these conversations because they're so good and enthralling. Our audience has had a lot of questions around just how they specifically navigate the spaces they're in. What does it look like to navigate women who might not be in the space that I'm in and want to be as collaborative? What does it look like to navigate my specific career? Does it hurt me or help me to be focused on women? And I think so much of this comes down to the bigger theme of authenticity. And what are the concessions that you make? And what are the things that you do to hold true to yourself? And so I wanted to do a quick around the horn and ask this final question, which is, if you had one piece of advice to give to this group, sort of navigating how to build an inner voice, a North Star, a sounding board that lets them continue moving toward authenticity in a way that is meaningful to them, what would that piece of advice be? Jen, I want to start with you, and then we'll go to Rita, and then we'll keep it going from there.
Oh, this is a hard one. My single piece of advice, um, continue to seek out those mentors, and not just one, all of the ones that you need that can help you navigate all the aspects, because the only way that you can truly be authentic to yourself and to really achieve your goals and achieve your dreams is to continually be working on all aspects of yourself. And I've got my mom mentors, I've got my working mom mentors, I've got my academic mentors, I've got my pharmacy mentors, I've got my health policy mentors, and I try to bring them all together and helping me become the complete me that is all of those crazy things pushed together. So keep seeking out all of those different people that can help you navigate the crazy that makes us who we are.
Thank you, Jen. Rita, then Ken.
All right, so this is based on behavioral science research, actually, but to use this sort of notion of a diagnostic of, are other people seeing me the way that I want to be seen? And thinking about that in the situations you're in. And if that's not the case, sort of advocating for yourself and saying like, okay, this is who I am, let me tell you, and this is who I want you to see me as. And if that's not gelling, figuring out a way to sort of get into a different situation where that's going to be the case, because there are all kinds of benefits in both, one, that self-advocacy, and being in spaces where people recognize each other as they want to be understood. So I think that's my advice, to sort of use that diagnostic tool as much as you can.
Kim.
Me next. Yeah, great. Yeah, I guess my advice, and a lot of people say this, and I just have found it to be true about following your own passion. Like if there's something that you really want to do and that you feel passionate about, yes, do it. Even if it is not necessarily already perceived as, I don't know, super valuable by others, or however it is. I mean, even if it's not necessarily fitting in the mold, I think you can make your passion important to other people as they see how important it is to you. So that would be my piece of advice.
Michelle, then Emily.
So I struggled a fair bit with imposter syndrome when I got my first job out of grad school, or even finishing grad school probably. And so I just wanted to share what helped me get over my imposter syndrome. So I realized that I felt like an imposter because I thought that I wasn't doing a super great job, but more importantly, everyone else was doing awesome, right? Everyone else had it together. They had a plan. They were on top of everything. And then I slowly realized that nobody really knows what they're doing, and everyone is just putting on this brave front, some people more than others. And that the more people I talked to, the more that everybody had imposter syndrome, and we all thought that everybody else was doing better than we were. So it feels contradictory. It's like, instead of bringing myself up, I sort of brought everybody else down, like off these pedestals. And I was like, oh, okay, we're all actually doing fine together. We also all don't really know what we're doing together, but that's okay. So I don't know if that'll help anyone else, but.
I'm so tickled that you brought up purple hair. Just as a side note, you can't see it on Zoom super well, but I do have purple hair. I don't know that is obvious to you. So props, you can be a doctor and have purple hair streaks in. My advice for everybody is know who to call on your bad days. You're going to have bad days. It's going to happen. Have those people ready to go. I have this amazing comic that I saw. That was like the value of female friendships. And it's somebody saying, oh, I feel ugly today. And it's all of the friends being like, you are a goddess. You are so strong. You're amazing. Like, know who those people are who can pump you up when you don't have the energy to believe in yourself. Just know those people, keep them close, and value those.
Thank you all so much for sharing. And thank you to our audience for being present with us this evening. So much is changing and feels positive in the space of STEM. And I think that change is happening through women supporting other women, and through women opening doors for other women, which I think is, to Michelle's point, making men think differently about the work that they do. To Jen's point, redefining what leadership looks like. And I think also, women like Kim and Rita, you doing the work that you're doing in front of mixed audiences and really changing how men and women look at leaders in the spaces that they are in. So I want to thank each of you for not just being here today, but for being in the fields that you were in, for being amazing women, opening doors for other women. And I feel confident that our audience here today are learning something from this, and that they will sort of be following in big footsteps and becoming women who are opening doors for other women, and helping us have more women in STEM. So thank you all for joining us this evening, and we hope to see you in the future.